And once you get that document up, you can set that to the side for just a second. Like I said, I just want it up for you. All right. We're going to change things up a little bit. We've been sort of summarizing Ansari at the start of class. And we're kind of going to do that this time. We're going to go about it a different way. Because, again, what I really want you guys focused on is not just whatever ideas he's after. Those are important. But, like we talked about last time, it's not what he says, it's how he says it. So I'm just curious, if you guys, maybe in your notes, maybe you're taking some notes, and if you're not, the future you is going to be really upset with you right now. Hello. I'm curious if you guys found any good quotations, something that struck you like, oh, the way he said this, or the fact that he did this thing, that stuck with me a little bit. Usually, that's a good sign, right? Take a minute to think about that. What's your name, sir?
Miles.
You're Miles?
Yeah.
Hi, Miles. All right. I'll give you an example. One of my favorites, it's on page 90. I'll give you the exact quotation. Talking about this guy named Derek, who Ansari says this is going to be kind of rude, but he calls him like a pretty boring white guy. So maybe a guy that kind of looks like me, just kind of like if I murdered somebody, you'd be in a lot of trouble. You'd be like, well, describe him. It's like, you look like a white dude. I can't help more than that. There's a lot of those, right? So he kind of looks like that. Nothing special type thing. But he talks about the way that he navigates, I think it's OkCupid. Yeah. And he's just clicking through all these women. And sort of middle of the page, Ansari describes it like this when he's clicking X on all these women. Like a J. Crew sweatshirt that didn't live up to his expectations upon seeing a larger picture. So he's comparing the way that this Derek guy approaches potential partners, right? He's saying he's approaching it almost like you would when you're online shopping. Like on Amazon or Target.com or something like that. You're just kind of you look at the picture, maybe you make it bigger and you're like, no. That level of nonchalance, that level of sort of lack of empathy, right? To treat a person like a sweatshirt is kind of interesting. So I love that quotation. We may or may not talk about it today, but I want to bring it to your attention. That's what we're looking for, right? We talked about this last time. I'm curious, anything at all from your reading stand out to you guys, stick with you guys? Again, maybe it's in your notes type of thing. You guys. I mean this. And I'll say it right now, and some of you are like, I'm not doing that. Notes are going to help you out a lot. When you sit down to write this paper and you got nothing to start with, you're going to be really bummed out. Notes give you something to start with. Just saying. Okay. Well, I got a couple other things I can draw our attention to. To begin with, I really like his discussion. I think it starts on page 97 of profile pics. Again, he's talking about how people sort of position themselves, pose themselves, market themselves even. We've talked about a little bit when it comes to putting yourself up on one of these websites. Do you guys remember, there's some interesting differences between sort of what a woman is expected to look like on one of these sites versus what a guy is expected to look like. Does anyone remember any of those differences? Kind of interesting. Curtis. Amen. Told you. None. Okay. Man, these papers are going to be rough. Anyway, okay. Well, if you don't like reading, and it's difficult for you, he actually just gives us some pictures of the kinds of pictures he ends up talking about. There on the very next page. 98. It's kind of weird to think about, but this is pretty accurate. There are some hard categories for the kinds of pictures you're going to encounter on sites like this, right? And I don't think there's that many, right? So for instance, you have the straightforward smiling pic of these young women, the flirting to camera pic, and you can notice kind of some of the differences there with how those women are posed. The guys are very different. The not smiling, looking away pic. On the next page, you have something similar. There's a dude in the desert. Why can't guys look at the camera? Why can't guys smile? You've been doing that since you were a kid, right? Say cheese, right? We do that with my boys. Very cute. But at some point you age out of that, I guess. And again, not just not smiling, but you have to act like someone just surprised you out of the bush and took your picture. Right? That's how it has to. Why? Why is it like that, do you think?
Seen as unattractive.
Well, yes. I'm sorry it tells us that, but what I'm saying, and again, this is the kind of work we're doing, Ansari is implying that the fact that that's unattractive, there's a reason somewhere under all that. Why do you guys think that is? Why do guys have to do that? And again, women in this case, they're expected to do something slightly different. If you turn another page, he gives you an example of unattractive pictures for women. My personal favorite is this young woman in a Budweiser top of some kind with a beer in her top, drinking a beer, flipping off the camera. Like that is a message. That is a particular kind of lady, according to the picture. But according to the research he's done, that's viewed mostly as, again, unattractive. We don't like that. Why? Why can't a woman be like that? Why can't a guy look at the damn camera? What's that about, do you think? Would that bother any of you? See a picture of a young woman like that? What would your opinion of her be? Because that's what this is, right? You see a picture of someone, you form an opinion. You have no opinions.
I'd chill with her.
Huh?
I'd chill with her.
You would chill with her. Okay. Why?
She cool. Based on the picture.
Cool like how?
She don't care.
About anything? Sure. You say you would chill with her. Would you date her, potentially? No. Why? She's cool. You just said. Seems like fun.
I said I'd chill with her. I said I did it.
Well, that's kind of what Ansari's getting at. What I'm curious about is why. His research suggests that most people would agree with you. Yeah, what's up?
Can we speak from like external sources that we've learned from before?
If you want to, you know.
I mean, I didn't know if we're supposed to speak solely from the book.
What?
I know we're speaking solely from the book.
No, I mean, we're just trying to figure this out, man. Go for it.
I heard that studies show that women find that if men's emotions are like if they're more of a mystery, they find that more attractive.
Yeah.
So I think that the looking away crap, all that mess, not acting like they care
Yeah.
more attractive on average.
Good. So it's this idea in these pictures that a guy has to give the impression that they, not only that they maybe didn't want their picture taken, but they're not worried about it. It doesn't affect them. You're like, what are you doing, Trevor? Whatever, man. You're fine. Right? Why? What is that? We're dealing with like masculine and feminine stereotypes at this point, right? Men are held to a certain standard, women are held to a certain standard. Why do men have to appear nonchalant? Look, this young woman looks fucking nonchalant. As you said, doesn't seem like she cares about much, right? But that's not okay for her. Why, do you think? Okay. I can move on. I would crush this paper. I'm not worried about it. After that, 107. Again, we're talking about sort of comparing people to products. In this section on algorithms, I'm sorry, he's talking to one of his experts, Sheena Iyengar is how I'm probably going to mispronounce her name. But she says, essentially, when you say, I want a guy that's 6 foot tall and has blah, blah, blah characteristics, you're treating a human being, she says, like one, and she means like a product. Again, she talks about the way that we search for people online. Usually you have to put in some kind of parameters to narrow your search. But that's exactly the sort of thing we do when we're looking for like a blender or I don't know what kind of things you guys might buy, but like a shirt, when you're looking for something online that you're interested in purchasing, it's a similar mechanism to a person that I guess you might spend time with, romantically or otherwise. I'll just do this myself. 108, they compare Tinder to a game. And he uses Tinder a lot because, I don't really know what the landscape is now. When the book came out, it was easily the most popular sort of app for this sort of thing. It's probably still the most popular, but I assume others have kind of caught up a little bit. But he also asks you to think about, I mentioned mechanisms, like how these apps that you interact with, usually on your phone, right? The physical mechanism, like are you swiping, are you tapping things, how do pictures work on some of these apps, all that stuff works on you in one way or another. And the case he makes when he talks about Tinder, because it's like little cards that you swipe back and forth, again, his argument seems to be it sort of takes that human element out of it. You're not viewing them as people, you're viewing them as cards with people on them, right? So it's like a game, it's less serious. That allows for two things. One, it allows for, kind of limiting the anxiety that we can feel when it comes to potentially meeting new people. I think all of us feel anxious in some way in that scenario, okay, and that's nice. The downside would be we don't maybe view them as people. We view them as cards, right? Anyway, we're almost done with this, and then you can maybe silently stare at me for another portion of class. Lastly, he speaks to that downside, again, specifically when thinking of Tinder. Here on 117, I really like, he points to one of the primary arguments against apps like this. So Tinder, OkCupid, I don't know these. I don't use these. What are some other ones? Do you guys know? No? Not really either. Anyway, apps like that. The knock on them is just what I said about Tinder. Like, people view it, they don't take it seriously enough. We judge people based on what characteristics solely when it comes to something like Tinder. What? Physical. Do you remember? He has a rejoinder for that with his party analogy. Do you guys remember what he says about Tinder? How he says, like, well, that's actually not a big deal. We judge people physically. Do you remember what he says? You guys should take notes. Some of you are going to really struggle with the paper. Anyway, he makes the point that before all this technology that people are so worried about, right? How did you meet people? You may not know this. People used to have to go hang out. He uses a party, but anything like that, right? A group of people get together and hang out, chill, as you say. And when you're going to approach a person, if you're romantically interested in a person, can you guess what would be the first set of characteristics you would judge them upon to decide whether or not you're going to go up to them, to get to know them? Can you guess, sir? Yeah. Go for it, Curtis.
How do you look?
Yeah, they're physical characteristics. Because it's kind of like that's how it's always worked. You can't know somebody before you see them throughout all of human history, right? So the point he's making here is, for all the positives and negatives to a thing like Tinder or OkCupid or social media, the way that we're kind of branching out a little bit to think about it, in some ways it's actually not that different. It's more efficient, and maybe it's a little colder in terms of how we relate to people. But when it comes to just the general setup, like of how we work with each other, yeah, man, we got eyes. You walk around, you're like, oh, that person, I like you, I don't like you, right? We do that all the time. And then you decide, well, I'm going to talk to that person, right? It's a good point he makes. Anyway, all right, let's move to the workshop. So this is the email I sent you guys. Some things you got to know. That tea is still hot. That's crazy. Number one, what is in front of you? Hopefully. Some of you aren't looking at it, so that's an interesting decision. This is a student example from your class, okay? What that means is, they could be here. I actually don't remember who it is off the top of my head. They might be absent. But we need to approach it like they're here, right? That is to say, we should be respectful, right? You would think that would go without saying, but it doesn't. So I like to start with that. Let's be respectful of each other's work. The reason I pull examples, 2 reasons. Number 1, I am never going to bring you straight trash, okay? I think there is something good, something useful for us in this example. Something we can look at and say, oh, let's all try to do that, right? However, I will also do my best to never bring you something that is just A+ material ready to go into a paper, because we have nothing to say about that, right? So there's something to be improved upon. There's a positive takeaway and there's a negative, basically, and we're going to talk about both. All right, before we jump in, I want to give us some parameters, some things to think about. Does anyone recall, and I know we talked about this 2 days ago, so it could be difficult, but the 3 I's. First of all, what are they for, the 3 I's? When do you use them? Body paragraphs. Good. Does anyone happen to remember what any of them are? Identify, you said. Good. All right. Now, would anyone happen to recall what any of these terms pertain to when it comes to parts of a body paragraph?
Identify the topics that...
Good. All right.
Illustrate, proves the argument.
With what?
Evidence.
Good. The evidence that you point to, you're going to use to prove that argument. How do you go about proving that argument with that evidence? Yeah.
Well, you interpret it and you elaborate more on the
Yeah.
elaborate.
This is where you analyze this evidence. You walk me through the sort of mental steps to prove that argument. That's how every body paragraph works. Every single one you ever write in a class like this. Now, why do I bring that up? What you have in front of you. This is what somebody turned in for homework. This is their close reading sort of submission. I'm double checking to make sure. Yeah, I took their name off. I was a little bit worried. Anonymous or what? Anyway, what I want us focused on is really just 2 things. Because there's a lot of chaff here. Is anyone familiar with that term? Does anyone know what chaff is? Okay, it's kind of an old term. You say you separate the wheat from the chaff. Wheat is the useful stuff. We use that for like bread and whatnot. Chaff is all the other crap we can't really, you gotta kind of pull that stuff away. Okay? So there's good stuff in here. There's some other stuff that maybe we'll use later, maybe we'll use somewhere else, but it's not gonna help us right now. Okay? Now how are we gonna go about looking for that? 2 things. 1, when you read, maybe take some notes, I don't know, get crazy. Where do you see evidence? Where do you see specific material from the book? Not general stuff, right? specific elements from the book. Could be in multiple places. Secondly, do you see any analysis of that evidence? And this could be a little bit tricky, but we're going to do our best, right? That's the only two things I'm worried about. You see anything else, you can still note it, but for our purposes today, that's probably mostly stuff where we're just going to put that to the side, okay? We're worried about evidence and analysis of that evidence. Take a minute, read over this, we're going to talk about it. Take another minute. All right. So, to begin with, let's start with evidence. Where's our first bit of evidence? It takes us a little bit, right? Which a lot of you, the ones I haven't looked at all of them, and I expect I haven't received all of them yet, but the ones I looked at, usually with this assignment, it takes you a little while, right, to kind of write your way to the evidence. That is super typical of the drafting process. That's just how our brains work. The two things I want you to discover in doing this assignment: number one, you almost never know what you want to say to begin with, right? You kind of do sometimes. You have an idea, but it's not like the paper lives up here and you just have to, you got to figure it out on the page. The second point kind of ties into that. I keep getting panicked emails about the homework. Some of you are so scared you're going to get the homework wrong, which is super possible, by the way. But I've told you before, I grade homework on effort. If it seems like you tried, then you're fine, right? Where you don't want to screw up is the paper, but that's why we do the homework along the way, okay? So take swings, miss, that's fine. But I worry some of you are in the camp where you're like, well, if I can't do it right, I'm just not going to do it. And then where does that get you when the paper comes around, right? Take some damn swings. Anyway, we have to write our way to the evidence. Where's our first bit of evidence? We got a couple. I counted 3, I think. Take your time.
We used the quote,
Mm-hmm.
you didn't marry because you were madly in love, waiting for love was luxury that many, especially women, couldn't afford in the 1960s.
You guys are so quiet, it's almost scary. I do appreciate it. You didn't marry because you were madly in love. Waiting for love was a luxury that many, especially women, could not afford in the 1960s. They put in the 1960s there in brackets because that's not in the quotation. That's kind of a fancy move, but we kind of need it to make sense. So you can do that sort of thing. There's different ways to do that. If they contextualize the quotation better, they may not have to include that. You know what I'm saying? Ansari, talking to one of his experts about marriage in the 1960s, right? Then you don't have to. But anyway, yeah, that's our first piece of evidence. Now, I'm going to highlight this for you. I believe it will highlight it on your screen. That shows up. Man, that's a lot of text before we get to that evidence, right? What are we talking about? And I'm going to see if this helps. This may not help some of you in the back. I'll go ahead and project it. Well, I thought it was. Why won't you obey me? Anyway, what's all that stuff at the beginning? What are we talking about up here? We're making some points, right? What are we talking about in those first 4 or 5 sentences, however much it is? And yeah, if you got young eyes, feel free to do this, but if you want to, right there in your hand up, man?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's pretty much like, it's like a topic sentence explaining what the rest of it's going to be about.
All this is a topic sentence?
Well, like, I guess that's what I get.
Some of it is.
Yeah, not all of it.
The important question would be what? And we're going to talk about that. Not all of it.
Right.
What kind of stuff were we mentioned some things up here. Does anything stand out in these first couple sentences to you guys? As like, potentially useful. In any fashion whatsoever. We started out talking about the book is not a novel, because it's not fiction, right? But, you know. What are we talking about up here? Here. I'll break it off for you. What are we talking about up there?
The dating styles like now and like that.
Yeah. We point out that Ansari is very interested in the sort of differences between now and how it used to be. Okay? What else do we say about him? This is what's known as low-hanging fruit. This is a super easy question because it's literally in front of you.
Use a plethora of rhetorical devices to
Like
see
what?
the experiments and interviews.
Well, that's how he does his research. In the very next sentence, though, we talk about punchlines, running jokes, first-hand experience. Right? So we're saying he does different kinds of research. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. He uses different kinds of rhetorical devices, and I'm going to tell you about that. We're going to talk about that at some point. And then I'm going to give you what I would call a kind of working thesis right about here. What is this first bit, do you think? If it ends with a thesis. Probably. Yeah. Yeah. It's an introduction. Kind of. It needs some love. But again, for a lot of you, that's kind of how you start. You start talking about the book generally. You have some general ideas or thoughts. And beyond that, I don't know. This young woman, I remember now who it is, maybe is so trained up that she actually wrote a little bit of an introduction to start this off. Okay, cool. For our purposes today, we don't have time to deal with all that, okay? But what I would suggest to her is, take that, put it to the side. I think we're going to start, if I remember, we're going to talk about introductions next time. She's got something ready to go already, right? To start thinking about that. That's a great place to be. For us, what I would tell you, actually, and by the way, this is a PDF, that's why the formatting is so goofy. I'll fix it as we go. This is all probably her working introduction, because this is her working thesis right here. And we have no more time to talk about that. What we are focused on, though, body paragraphs. I think this first sentence, advancement in technology has created a domino effect of advancement in day-to-day life, as well as traditional social roles. That's her stab at a topic sentence. That's a kind of an argument. What is she arguing there? Something about technology. Put it in your own words. What is she saying? What has technology done, according to this student? Right, but that's resulted in what? She's basically saying technology has advanced our day-to-day life. She says something more important though. Technology has also advanced something else. Our social roles. How we deal with each other. What we expect of each other. Usually you talk about this in terms of gender, but there's other ways to define it. Yeah. Okay. Key point here. We need to make sure we're talking about Ansari's argument and not our own. And I think she might be, but it's not clear right now, okay? Either way, I'm okay with this as a topic sentence for now. We'll see what we come up with. Now, we're down to you guys and what I asked you to do. Let's see how you did. I'm gonna have to fix this all the way through. It's gonna be maddening. So, that's enough for now. Ooh. All right, this is our quotation. The second thing I asked you to do, she also cited it incorrectly, but that's all right. The second thing I asked you to do, where do we analyze this quotation? What do we say about it? You didn't marry because you were madly in love. Waiting for love was a luxury that many, especially women, could not afford in the 1960s. What do we prove? What do we explain with that quotation, about that quotation?
Yeah. That's the traditional
You're looking immediately after it, yes? Good. That's where it should be. Well, what do we say in these next couple sentences? What do we end up talking about?
Situations were much different at the time, and because of the advanced technology that's affected it, as before the social roles, but just overall, like, the different situations.
Well, importantly, first question, does she say that second thing you were talking about? Is it there?
Technically,
Where?
I mean, like, she's explaining how the situation, we know the situations are much different now, and she's already talking about that.
So you're telling me it's like heavy implied.
That's the way I perceive it, I'm not sure if that's the.
My point is you're giving a generous reading. It's not on the page. 95% of the time, you have to assume I am not in your head, right? You need to have this stuff on the page. So number one, if we are going to talk about that, and I think she wants to because it's in her topic sentence, get that shit on the page, okay? Has to be. I can't give you credit for what's not there. Number two, and I think this would help with number one, do we talk about the quotation in our analysis? No. No, we do not. We talk about the idea that the quotation is getting at. We did this last time, if you recall. I'm not saying ideas aren't important, but why do we quote? Language. We're talking about rhetoric. We're talking about a written text and rhetoric. We were talking about language. This idea, all the couples married because, and some of that's fine. He's got pages explaining that idea. You could quote any of it, right? But we quoted this. So we need language to focus on. Because look, after these sentences, we're moving on to something else. It's not an anecdote either, that's the wrong word, but I do appreciate her taking a shot. Let's come back to this. Here, I'm gonna bump this down a little bit just to get it out of the way. You didn't marry because you were madly in love. Waiting for love was a luxury that many, especially women, could not afford in the 1960s. What is some language that we could talk about here? Maybe to get at those ideas. What's interesting in this quotation? Yeah.
Whenever they use luxury, it makes it seem like it's such a valuable concept.
Well, what is a luxury? Like, what do you guys think of when you think of the word luxury?
Fancy car.
What's up?
A fancy car.
Very fancy, very, very expensive. Yeah. Hard to get. Also, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea of luxury, isn't that sort of, you don't need like a fancy car. You want one because it's pretty fucking cool. But that's part of why it's cool, that you don't need it. You know what I'm saying? We could all get wherever we're going on like scooters. You can make it happen. But if a guy rolls past your scooter in a Bentley, or whatever, something with a roof, I guess, if you're on a scooter, you get a little jealous, or you get a little like, what does that guy do? Like you're a little impressed potentially because of that luxury, that unnecessary expense, right? But we're saying marrying for love was that back then. What does that mean? We're applying the idea, the connotations we have around the term luxury to marrying for love. Let's talk about that a little bit. What does that tell you about love back then? Or marriage back then? I thought you had your hand coming up. You gotta be careful though. I will call on somebody.
Marriage is like a business decision.
It's a business decision. Ooh. Doesn't that, I mean, real talk, I'm probably one of the few married people in the room. That made me shiver. Whoa. Like, what woman would I consider a business? Whoa. Okay. Yeah. And again, we want to temper that a little bit because we don't want to. I don't think he ever quite gives the impression. I mean, I'm sure some people did, but I think most people weren't legit like, you have a pulse. Like, it's probably a little more than that, right? But compared to how we think of it, yeah. So, something like, you know, and this is just what we did last time, comparing. What tiny person uses this? Comparing. Okay. How else did we talk about luxury? Let's get a little more of that in there. I gave you guys some, but you gave me some too. Just think about luxury for me. How did we describe it? Huh? I can't hear you, dog. That, like, expensive. Not just value. That's an important distinction, okay? Like, shelter is valuable because you don't want to be exposed to the elements. But a skylight is expensive. See what I'm saying? There's a difference. So it's like having a partner for life is valuable just because none of us want to be alone. But having a smoking hot partner, that's a luxury. I have one, by the way. I'm just putting it out there. Anyway, all right. I'm married up. That's pretty sweet. Let's see. So the idea of expense. What are you expending, potentially, when you marry for love versus more of like a business decision? Because now we're saying it might cost something, right? What do you spend? Yeah, what's up?
Is it happiness?
Maybe. Why do you say that?
Because you don't really you don't really marry the person for the right reasons.
What do you say?
You didn't marry the person for the right reasons.
Well, we got to be careful. We can't judge like a whole other time of people, right? Like they would think we're kind of weird for the way we do it. So they might say like we're not doing it for the right. Like so. I'll ask the question in a different way. What does it cost to marry for love? Right? You got to spend something to do it. Yeah, it takes time. Unless you're just super lucky. And again, same rules apply to the dude in a Bentley rolling past you on your scooter. In most cases, it took that guy more time to earn that Bentley. But some motherfuckers just get born into Bentley. It's very different. So we're talking about expense. Further, they didn't have that time, right? Isn't that kind of what he's implying? In the whole chapter. They got married, what, when they were 19, 20, when they were your age? But now you have time. You can afford that expense, right? You have more money in that arena. We get all of that. We're starting to argue from luxury. One fucking word in context. we're rolling now. If some of this other stuff comes up, again, you can talk about it. But get me there first, right? Talk about the quotation. There's stuff there. You guys can do this. I would say there's at least one more very interesting sort of rhetorical move he makes in this quotation. Luxury is very good, and there's more we can say about it, but we have limited time, unfortunately. Yes, sir.
At least at that time, women kind of had to get married because they didn't have any other option.
So you're saying it's the especially women move?
Yeah.
Yeah. What about that? Because again, where's it at? Oh, the way grammar works. Don't freak out. But the way grammar works, when you set this off with those commas, one thing you were telling me as a reader is that that sentence should work without that. You didn't marry because you were madly in love. Waiting for love was a luxury that many could not afford. See that? So you're telling me that you included that to be a little more specific, to make a little more of a point in one way or another. Okay? Kind of interesting, given what we're talking about, right? Why? Sam started sort of the thought, but I want, just as a class, I want us to think about it a little bit. What are we saying now about marriage and love there in the 60s? For women, especially. You guys kill me. You're trying to hurt me. You succeed. I said this at the start. You can be wrong. It's fine. Right now. Yeah, what's up?
Because women they weren't working like this.
Largely at that time, women were not. They were getting into the workforce, he tells us. But they were still largely like housewives, expected to do that whole thing. And at one point he mentions, for a lot of women, marriage was like their way out of the house. Otherwise, you're just living with your folks. God. I moved out in high school. Couldn't even imagine. I'm also a white male, so it's a little bit different. Especially women, he says. What does especially mean? Let's start there.
You can fix them more.
Good. We can make the argument. You see what I'm saying? Great. Ugh. I was gonna say for anyone without a penis, but that's probably too. I just didn't want to say women again. I'm gonna give you one for free because I want us to talk about at least one more quotation. Further accentuated by his use of commas. All I said there, because again, I write like me, you write like you. Especially women. And it's made more special by the use of these commas, right? It's almost like you could argue, that's what I'm starting to argue, he draws your attention to this by doing that. You see what I'm saying? And if that's true, and I think you can make the case, well, then it's like, well, why is he doing that? What idea might he be sort of arguing without arguing it on the page, right? What we're starting to say is he's underlining just how special they are in this way. Special, by the way, isn't always a good thing, okay? In this case, situation's a little more dire for women in the 60s when it comes to marriage. They have fewer options, and they got to make them quicker. And we're saying that comes from these commas. We could keep going. We won't. But we could. And again, we're doing all that by focusing on language, okay? All right, let's try one more. We don't have time for all of them. And again, some of this could stay. I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of whatever about that, but if you like it, you like it. I'm gonna try to break this up so we can look at it some. Where's the other? Right, there's the other quotation. There it is. There's part of. Okay. I'll leave it up to you guys. Actually, I won't. Because I don't like the fact that she calls this an anecdote. We should fix that for you guys. What's an anecdote? Huh? A personal story, usually very short. Okay. This is not an anecdote. What is this? I mean, yes.
I'm sorry.
You can quote an anecdote.
Sorry, it's a story of someone else. Sorry.
It's all good. In the early 1960s, a full 76% of women admitted they would be willing to marry someone they didn't love. If you were a woman, you had far less time to find a man. We were just talking about that, weren't we? Almost like this leads really well. Anyway, true love? This guy has a job and a decent mustache. Lock it down, girl. That's not an anecdote. What is that? Lock it down, girl. We have a word for that. You guys have a word for that. Is Ansari being serious when he says lock it down, girl? No. What's he doing? So it is a, if you're joking, you are telling a, guys. Keenan? Are you Keenan? When you're joking, you are telling a what? He saved you. You're telling a joke. I like to throw you guys softballs just to watch in amazement how so many of you won't swing at it. Yes, it's a joke. It's not an anecdote. I know that seems like a small point, but once you know what it really is, you kind of realize how big the mistake is, right? Because it's so easy. All right, so we're talking about a joke Ansari makes. And he makes a lot of them, but we like this one. We quoted it. Okay. Looking at this quotation, the first thing I want to do, I'm not even interested in analysis yet. We'll get to that. We claim we are concerned with the joke. And it seems like a lot of what we talk about after, that holds up. We're interested in the joke. Well then, do we need all of that to get the joke? Is the first half funny? No. What is the first half? In the early 1960s, a full 76% of women admitted they would be willing to marry someone they didn't love. What is that? It's a statistic. It's a troubling statistic for sure to our sensibilities. But we don't talk about it at all. At all. When we introduce the quotation, we don't talk about it. When we analyze the quotation, we don't talk about it. It's not necessary. Now look, I'm going to delete this before I do real quick. If you wanted to talk about this as a statistic, because that has rhetorical value, right? Implicitly, we trust statistics. This is part of how social media is ruining our politics. People just post statistics that aren't true, but you're like, well, it's a percentage, it must be true. Like, we trust them. You could talk about that. My issue is, she does not. So get rid of it. If you were a woman, you had far less time to find a man. True love? This guy has a job and a decent mustache. Lock it down, girl. Much tighter quotation. And that's everything we actually want to talk about. So let's do that now. What does she say about it? Read over that real quick. It's just a couple sentences. I'm curious if she does a better job here. Can somebody try to kind of sum up? She makes like maybe 2 points here, right? What did she say? She does focus on part of the quotation, right? That's good. I like that. What did she say about it? It is. And real quick, that's an excellent place to start when you talk about a joke. And we talked about this last time. If you were to try to argue to me that a joke is funny, what kind of argument is that? Banal. That's the point of the joke. You want it to be funny. Do we do more than that? I think we do. What else do we say about it? Because it helps if it's funny. That's awesome. What else does it do? You got a point in here. A point is something you have to prove, right? You have to speak to. It's an argument. Where's it at in here?
Criteria for marriage for women almost 50 years ago is non-existent.
Yeah. That's an argument. Now, quick issue with that. Number one, we admit that we're joking, okay? But number two, when you say that when a woman finds a man with a job and a decent mustache, she should marry him, that tells you that they have criteria. Their criteria is job and a decent mustache. It's super different from ours, and we may consider it incorrect, but it's not non-existent, right? And that's kind of a problem because, and again, this is another, I like to tell you guys about traps you run into, okay? One of the traps you guys will unintentionally run into is you want to kill the conversation. You want hard answers and you want them fast. Because that allows you to say, well, I solved that shit, and you just immediately forget about it. When you say their criteria is non-existent, first of all, if we're being completely honest, that literally means they would just walk out into the street and be, you. Why? I don't know, we have no criteria. Come get it. Right? Like that. But we know that's not the case. That's ridiculous. So instead, when you try to deal with whatever their criteria were, well, now you have to have a conversation. And I know it's harder, but it also gives you more to talk about. Right? This is why it's a trap. Any of you who struggle with length requirements, that's one of the traps you fall into. So let's think about this. It's not non-existent. He provides research, ends with a funny remark. Okay, they say to summarize his points. And then she kind of, I guess, gets to what his point is. If a woman finds a man with a job and a decent mustache, she should marry him. This reiterates, we only need one of those, that criteria of marriage for women, I guess, B. That's kind of goofy, but that's fine. 50 years ago was what? What is he really getting at? He's not saying it's non-existent, right? We covered that. Job and a decent mustache. Do I have that right? Why is that funny, first of all? Let's start there. She didn't really cover that. Why do we find that funny? I think we do. Lock it down, girl. Why is that funny? That you should lock down a job and a decent mustache. lock it down, girl, kind of slangy language. Sure. It's a nice tonal shift, right? He goes from statistics to a little bit of jokey stuff to hard slang, and that we like that. It's surprising, that shift. You can talk about that. I'll just make a note here because tone shifts. Okay, that's fine. I don't mind you explaining to me why it's funny. That's a good thing to do, talking about rhetoric. But I am more concerned with whatever point it is we're making. Job and a decent mustache. The hell is that? He could have said anything. That guy has 2 arms and a rabbit farm. Lock it down, girl. Like, could have said, why job and a decent mustache? We're quoting it, so we're implying that it matters, how it is said. Break it apart if you want. He's got a job, lock it down. Why does that matter?
You got money and money.
Well, and again, yes, which is good, the world we live in. But again, think back to the context. 1960s, we're talking about women now. Why does it matter that he has a job?
They don't. They don't have a job.
Okay, good. I mean, not good, but okay. Freedom of Women 50 years ago was first to find a partner as their okay. Number one, we're getting back to that idea that women have fewer options when it came to marriage because they had fewer options in general, which is interesting, by the way, right? The sort of implication there is we have more options when it comes to, like, hell, he talks about at one point, we don't even have to we're not expected to necessarily get married these days. You can kind of do whatever you want. And it's like, well, why is that? Well, maybe it's because you have more options in other arenas, right? Maybe those are connected somehow that we don't often think about. It's kind of interesting. Decent mustache. I would argue that's the funnier of the two. Why?
It's kind of like small, very small benefit. It's kind of like stereotypical.
It's ridiculous. If you knew someone who's like, oh, I married this guy, like, oh wow, why? His mustache, dog. You'd be like, you made the biggest mistake of your fucking life. Right? So we could start there. And second, the can't talk and type, sorry. Ridiculousness but I'm going to challenge us as a class here with like 5 minutes left. There could be something more. Sometimes a joke is just a joke. Sometimes it's just ridiculous. It's only for entertainment. That is true. And we can talk about that because it's nice to be entertained. We're talking about rhetoric. Okay. However, I want us to at least try to think about, is there an argument he could be making with that ridiculousness? I think there could be. Yes, sir.
It could be saying like, you could be saying they were married, not anyone, but they were quick to
Yeah.
get engaged.
Okay. How do we tie that into ridiculousness? I'm not disagreeing with you. Is there a way to connect how ridiculous marrying someone for a decent mustache is to this conversation we're trying to have about women and their options? short answer is yes, but you guys have to do it. Right there. Part of the reason the joke works is because it's ridiculous. The other part of the reason the joke works is because it's somewhat plausible. You follow me? He's talking about marriage in the 1960s. He implies a woman would marry a guy for a decent mustache. That's ridiculous to us. We find it funny. But part of our brains goes, well, that's ridiculous, but it's also maybe kind of halfway true. Right? So what truth is he highlighting? What is he maybe saying? What is he maybe pointing out that according to our standards about that time is ridiculous? Is ultimately what we're trying to figure out. Go for it.
I mean, the husband, it's just, I don't think like, a lot of people's husbands aren't necessarily good to them.
Yeah, you hear some of the stories, yeah.
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 And I feel like that would be, not trying to make yourself feel better about it, but it's almost like trying to find a benefit to it.
You lost me a little bit.
Like, that's such an insignificant aspect
Yeah.
of it, but it's just, it's something, you know, something.
Yeah, well, because, all right, well, take it this way. If he were being serious, which he's not, but this might help you guys think about it. If he were being serious about find a decent guy with a decent mustache, lock it down, what would your opinion of that statement be? What does that say about that time period? If women are locking down marriage partners because they had awesome mustaches.
You couldn't get anybody or any man to get married, bro.
Super low bar, right? Why do they have that super low bar, Sam? Good. And again, not good, you know. Okay, so we're taking the ridiculousness of that joke and saying, number one, entertaining, which by the way we haven't even talked about, we could, okay? But number two, we're gonna argue, Ansari is kind of taking the fact that you recognize it's ridiculous in your head and sort of implying the fact that women had to kind of live like this, that it's like halfway plausible, is also ridiculous according to our standards, right? All that is on the page, we're arguing, but it's not written, right? This book would be awful if it was just all like this, right? That's what rhetoric allows you to do. You make all kinds of implications. You make all kinds of points without making them. Just sort of straightforward like that, right? This is what we're trying to do. She chose excellent quotations. We had cut the second one down a little bit. She needs to fix her citations. She could do a better job with context. And she had a little bit of analysis, but the analysis could have been a lot better. But she's got the building blocks for body paragraphs here. Easily. Look back at what we did. I mean, again, I'm going to go ahead and make an executive decision and say, maybe she rewrites that somehow. But look at what we came up with as a class. I can't do it. All right. You start putting all that together, like that's a body paragraph. That's two quotations that work together. I think there's more to be said about it. We don't have time. You're lucky there. She's got something rolling now, right? Fine, good quotations. Some of you haven't quite made it over that hurdle. She's done that. And then focus on details. That's the work. It's like math class when they ask to see your work. This is the work, okay? If you don't do this, it just will not go well. That's the only way I know to say it to you, okay? Questions about any of that? for next time. I'm sorry, chapter 4. You got a whole weekend to dig into it. It's pretty good. We're going to talk about thesis statements a little bit next time. There's a handout on CourseDen. It mostly applies to what we're talking about. You'll see. But it gives you a good framework for thesis statements. That's mostly what I'm concerned with that handout, okay? And then also, I want you to take your best shot at a body paragraph. This is what we built today. We didn't put it all together, okay? But if you come at me with anything like this, I'll be supremely happy for you, okay? Take your best shot at a body paragraph, turn that in on CourseDen. I'll see you next week.